And can you hear me okay?
Can you hear me okay?
I can. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We are so excited to be in conversation with you. And thank you to everyone who has already signed in so far. It's going to be a really exciting conversation. And so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sinead Bovell, and I am the founder of WAYE. And we help prepare young entrepreneurs for the future of work and life with advanced technologies. So a future that will look very different from how we are living and working today. And for those of you who don't know Heather, who is an absolute rock star, to say the least, when it comes to the future of work. She's quoted quite often in CNN and New York Times. I read her work in Forbes all the time. So if you're looking for any detailed number-oriented future of work information, I highly suggest you Google anything Heather McGowan, because her work is really incredible, and you can just see the research that goes into everything that she writes and everything that she speaks about. So she is a future of work strategist, and there couldn't be somebody better on the line right now to talk to us about the future of work. So Heather, welcome, and where are you calling in from?
Thank you very much for having me. I am calling in from Boston today. So I live in Boston and New York, but my home is in Boston. I have an apartment in New York. So this is where I'm sheltering down right now. We've got some thunderstorms coming through, which I hopefully will not be a problem. And where are you?
I'm in New York. Canada is home, but New York has been home for the last 3 years. So
Whereabouts in New York?
I'm in Brooklyn.
Oh, nice.
What about you?
Tribeca.
Tribeca. Okay, gorgeous.
Across the river.
Well, everybody who's here today, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We will try to get to them as soon as we can. We do want to keep this as efficient as possible, as we said. And so I want to start by saying you've published an article in the Future of Work in Forbes about acceleration of the future of work because of this pandemic. And we've seen, for example, 80% of US healthcare is now happening via telehealth. Every school in the country is essentially operating online, or they should be operating online. And anybody that's not an essential worker is working from home. So we've accelerated into this digital economy. How much of what's happening now do you think will stick post-lockdown, and how much do you think should stick?
Well, I think that we need to make places where essential workers need to work safer. So to the extent that the virus hangs around for longer than we want it to, it's already hung around longer than we wanted it to. The ways in which we're trying to make essential workers safer is probably just scratching the surface and giving them the attention and due that's long overdue. So that piece of it, I hope, will continue our respect for them and our efforts to make them more safe than they are today. Online learning, I think we're figuring it out. I think that I've referred to this as a massive social experiment that was forced upon us. And so when it comes to education, for example, I think we're figuring out against our fears and prejudices what works online and what needs more work or what doesn't work online. And when it comes to work, I think we've proven that we can all work fairly effectively from home. And then it becomes a balance. Like I think it was in the Times this morning, that even if you're 5% less productive working at home, it costs 20% more to bring you into an office. And that isn't even figuring in the cost to the environment and the cost to your health, exposing yourself and others, because the virus is just one thing that goes through humans. So I think what we're going to do is end up being a lot more intentional about when we get together and why we get together. Like, why do we go to work? And I leave that question out there because I don't think we have a good answer. I mean, it used to be that we were working in a world of essentially what John Hagel refers to as scalable efficiency, where, we were in production mode and we wanted to just keep our eyes on everybody. Now we're in the world he refers to as scalable learning. So if we're learning, do we learn better together? We do learn some things better together. Certain phases of processes are better when we're physically together, because we can't get everything virtual yet. So I think there's a lot to consider there. I made a diagram that I'm working on for a future article about how things have changed in terms of where we work, how we work, who works, and what we do and how we've stretched kind of from the center being March 10th before the World Health Organization declared it a global pandemic, and how we've stretched out in so many different ways across those 4 axes, really in the first couple of weeks. Now we're at day 60 something. But what will snap back to the center? I'm not sure what should snap back to the center. It's a great question. I don't think we know yet, but I think we ought to be really paying attention right now.
Yeah, and I think that is a great way to phrase it. Why do we go physically to work? And there was a study done by Global Workforce Analytics, and they put the quantifiable number of employees staying home at about $11,000 per year. Each organization you save at an organization per employee, and then as an employee, you would save $2,500 to $5,000 depending on what your commute is like. And then so for roles like sales or consulting, where people are hopping on planes for a single meeting or driving hours for a single meeting, do you see it as the beginning of the end of that type of dynamic?
Well, I have to remind you that the way I normally make my living is flying on planes to speak to audiences. So
I'm part of that.
Yeah, I see that shifting, but I don't know if it's shifting 100% because I can just speak about my own world. There's something about the connection with an audience when you're live. And like, I'm in Boston, I want to go to Fenway Park and have a hot dog and watch a ball game. There are some experiences we want to have live and in real life, but do we need to hop on a plane for every meeting? Do I have to fly halfway around the world for I flew to South Africa in the fall to speak for 50 minutes. 50 minutes I flew, to the other side of the world and had to stay there for 4 days. Will I always do that? I don't know. I think we'll figure that out. I think we'll see a dramatic reduction in air travel for some of those things, and maybe this will be the beginning of us traveling by car again, or traveling in a different way, camping. All the different ways. Kind of think if we're not going to stay in lockdown for a year. So how are we going to get out and explore the world in a way that's safe?
And I think there's, even just in my network, a lot of people saying things like, we have to go back to normal, or when are we going to get back to normal? Yeah. But I think normal wasn't a great place. And I know you talk about it in your work. We were in a crisis before this one, from the environment to health to income inequality. We were living in excess constantly, driving everywhere without thinking about it. And so I would love for you to talk a little bit more about your work in acknowledging all of the different crises in the future of work, which include the environment, which include income inequality gap, and why this, as a silver lining, is the opportunity to build a new future of work. If you're going to put a silver lining to it, I think it would be that, a once-in-a-lifetime chance to not just recover, but to prosper in the future.
Right. So I wrote a second article. I'm not sure if you're referring to that or the stuff I put at the end of the first article, but I wrote a second article. I'm using this a lot in my talks, in that I feel like I'm almost 50 years old. So in the last 50 years, I feel like this is the third existential challenge of our lifetimes. And the first being the climate, which we've had ample evidence. It's man-made, human activities that have led to the warming of the climate. And despite having warnings that started with the Keeling curve in 1958 to NASA scientists testifying before Congress in 1980s, to Al Gore, to Greta, we've had wonderful people warning us in all sorts of interesting and creative and scientific ways. We haven't changed our behaviors. When it comes to income inequality, if you look at the Gini Coefficient, which is a measure of income inequality, so if you have 100 people and you have $100, if everybody has $1, Gini Coefficient is 0. If one person has $100 and 99 people have no money, Gini Coefficient is 1. So you're always going to have some inequality in a society because you reward people differently for different types of work. But we have gone from the lowest levels we were in the 70s, and now we're at the highest levels since the Great Depression. When you have great income inequality, not only is it bad for the people who are left out of the economy, it's actually bad for the people who are in the 1% too, because the economy can only grow so much in a developed world. So I could argue it from anybody's perspective, it's a bad idea to be as unequal as we are right now. And that's happened under every president, Republican and Democrat, so you can't even politicize it. That is a challenge. And If you were born in 1940, you had a 90% chance of doing better than your parents. If you were born in 1980, that dropped to 50%. So we're not even having social mobility anymore. Education's become more of a trap than a propellant for folks. And so we have this pause moment, and it's the first time, it's the first of the three challenges I see where we're putting humans before profit. So we are freezing our economy, and that's not a simple thing because lives and livelihoods are intertwined, but we are freezing our economy to take care of our most vulnerable. People over 65 or over 60 and those with underlying health conditions. We're putting them in the healthcare system first. And in doing so, we're taking the first right moral step, I think. We're going to have to open it up. We're going to have to change some things. But in doing so, it's causing a lot of people to pause and look and say, okay, in this moment, income inequality becomes even clearer. In October, one might not have cared if their Uber driver had health insurance or paid sick leave. In May, you sure do, because they can make you sick. So it starts to reframe the me-we problem we've had as a society. And the way I've been sort of explaining it in my talks is cultural anthropologist Margaret Mead was asked what was the earliest known indication of a society, of a civilization. And she said, they were expecting her to say like hunting tools or religious artifacts or clay pots or something like that. And she said it was a healed human femur bone, because in order to heal your human femur bone, you just have to rest. So somebody else took care of you. Somebody else was hunting and fishing and cooking and cleaning or whatever. That is the moment we're in right now. This is a potentially a healed femur moment for us to unleash more of the potential of society. And I say like we're standing at the edge of a raging river and everybody's talking about the big swells and the eddies that are distracting us, and that's the virus, and it's true. But we could be looking across that river, which we inevitably have to cross, and say, what are the paths we want to have on the other side of the winter? How do we get more people on the trail with us? And also to notice we've already started crossing that river. I mean, in 62 days or whatever it's been, we have flattened the curve in New York. I mean, incredible what's happened to New York and what New Yorkers have done. Not easy. And it's not left or right. It's the one thing we all agree on in most states is that we want to protect our most vulnerable. And that's a really good sign for a society. We started sending checks out. We need to send more of them. That's basically universal basic income. We need to do more of that. We're not flying as many places. The planet is breathing and healing. Now, when we start again, we have to think about what we restart, how we restart, who we pull into play. But I think there's a lot of, I just had to explain all that because I think there's a lot of silver linings in this moment if we're intentional and insistent.
Absolutely. And even if you look at Milan, the city leaders are now taking their plans from 2030 of building more bike lanes and walk lanes and doing them now.
Yep.
And so I think that we can do that. If we can do that across the board, we can really take a silver lining. And it's been a really tough time in terms of lives lost and jobs lost. So let's try to bring some positive through the situation that we're all in. And you talk a lot about culture being the backbone right now of resilient companies. So what do you think makes an effective leader right now? Because the future of work is just going to be even faster, and we're going to be experiencing these types of change, but constantly. So what do you think makes an effective leader?
I don't know if you have lunch with Cuomo every day, but even though I'm in Boston and I love Charlie Baker as well, I have lunch every day with Governor Cuomo. He's the source I want to listen to, and I've got recorded clips of this I'm going to use in my talk. He mentions basically the culture of New York: smart, tough. He has this like 5-point bulletin. That's the kind of leader you have right now. He focuses people on this is where we've been, this is where we are, this is where we're going unless we change our behavior. This is what we believe. He is comfortable being vulnerable, saying, I don't know, maybe we should have done this differently, because in order to be a leader in a world full of constant learning and adaptation, in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous VUCA world, you need to be all comfortable saying, I don't know, I was wrong, I failed at that, let's find out. And you need to focus on establishing the culture that allows more people, more inclusively, have more people learn. And you need to focus on constantly increasing your capacity. In his case, it's testing capacity. And in the case of an organization, it may be a shift in your business model where you need new skills And so upskilling and reskilling is not something you do once you're out of a job. It's something we all do every day.
Mhm.
A culture that allows us to do that.
Absolutely. And you can even see in companies' responses to the crisis how they're taking care of their employees,
Yep.
how they're taking care of their clients, who really stands by their mottos of protecting all stakeholders. And I think when we go back to somewhat of how things were, we'll hopefully see a different perspective on how companies treat their employees. But there are a lot of employees that now realize that they don't need to go into the office necessarily. Do you think organizations need to be more open to that, and things like flex work in order to start to prepare for a future in which we have more gig workers and we do need to pivot more frequently?
Well, I think those are two different things, whether you go into the office or not, or whether you're a gig worker, or they could be the same thing, but they could be different things. So whether you go into the office every day, I think we've all had a taste of this, and we're not going to go in and sit in traffic and burn fossil fuels to sit in a meeting we could have had on Zoom. I think we're all kind of going to agree that there's going to be, places that had 1 day a week work from home or work from anywhere will have at least 3 or 4 days a week of that, if not 5. In terms of gig workers, I think it makes a lot of sense for a company to have the flexibility to pull in talent when they need it, especially if the economy is rocky getting started again. But again, we can't leave folks without a social safety net, and we've been doing that for several decades now. So I'm all for the gig worker if we have a very strong social safety net, or as my friend Tom Friedman says, a trampoline. So we have the ability to help folks. Healthcare is universal and portable. Benefits are portable. You have access to learning all the time, because the more we learn, the more we're going to advance collectively as an economy, as well as every company within it.
Right. And just in case that somebody is not familiar with what we're talking about with the gig economy, in the future of work, if we start to pool in a little bit more automation and a little bit more digital workers, you may not necessarily work for one company 9 to 5, 5 days a week, because a robot would be sharing some of your jobs. So instead, maybe you work for a few companies multiple days a week, and so you're sort of like a gig worker in more of a contract-based setting. And that has been hypothesized as more popular in the future of work.
You could be a gig worker in any kind of work, because frankly, I'm a gig worker. I'm a gig worker as a speaker, as a consultant. You can be a big gig worker as a lawyer. You can be a gig worker as a teacher. You can do it in any profession, digital or not. We're all going to be digitally enabled in some way, but gig worker could be any type of job. We just need the social safety net for folks.
Absolutely. And I think we've seen now, we can't do it without government as a support. We can't do it alone. We need to have both private and partnerships working together, private and public partnerships working together. Right. And with that, in the future of work, if you were to fast forward the clock 5 to 7 years, what would you say the workforce would look like, or how do you think we would be operating that would be different from now?
Well, I think that we're probably going to have to need some pretty massive government interventions to get out of where we're headed right now, because the virus is going to keep us in some form of lockdown. Not everybody can work from home. It's something like 29 to 37% of the 2 percentages I've heard of existing jobs, the way we're currently configured, can work from home. That's not enough for the workforce. So as we're coming out of this, we're going to have so many different needs that the government's going to have to launch, I think, massive social programs. And we're going to need people to work in those programs. So the federal government's, I think, going to expand. That's my guess. And gig working is also going to expand, but with the safety net. Provided we're out of all of that in 5 to 7 years, I think we're going to see more of us working aligned with our purpose. That's my hope. Because if we're going to have to learn and adapt for life, which is my thesis in the book Chris Shipley and I just wrote, The Adaptation Advantage, you can't base your identity on a singular job. It's really kind of been faulty logic for a long time, but we still ask kids what they want to be when they grow up. We ask university students to pick a major before they've even stepped foot on campus or dialed into Zoom. And then the first thing we ask each other is, what do you do? And that's antiquated thinking that sort of boxes us into a singular identity. So we need to throw that off and create an identity that's resilient, internally validated, and connected to purpose. And organizations, rather than defining themselves by their products and services, define themselves by their culture and their capacity. So you align your purpose with the culture of the organization you want to work with. And then you continue to upskill to add to your capacity and to their capacity. Because I've said learning is the new pension. So that's how you create your future value every day. So we'll make this shift, I hope, over the next 5 to 7 years, where our educational institutions are focused on helping you find your purpose and expand your capacity, as opposed to finding one fixed point in space to work towards, which is probably behind you. And then as organizations, we're going to have people who engage with their whole human self, because now we've seen the background of everybody's homes. There's no artificial line anymore between whomever you are and how you work. And you'll bring your whole self to work aligned with your purpose and constantly increasing your capacity. So you'll align on these sort of learning tours with organizations.
And I think that there were so many incredible points and profound statements there. And one being the idea of retirement being a thing of the past for multiple reasons. The learn, work, retire is over. And one thing you talk about a lot in your work is as even our lifespan increases, and it happens to also go alongside automation and different things entering into the workforce. There are many reasons why retirement will start to become a thing of the past. But if we can start to prepare for the future of work more so by aligning us with our purpose versus just giving us a set of skills, knowing that we're setting up to fail by doing that because skills are depreciating at a really rapid rate, especially more tech-based skills. That's, I think, how you build more of a future for success.
Yes, and tech-based skills depreciate. And the reason they depreciate is there's always somebody behind you learning the next tool. But human skills appreciate, because the more exposure and experience you have to empathy, divergent thinking, creativity, communication, all that, those skills grow because they don't change. They're not a depreciating, changing skill the way technology skills are. And on the retirement, I use this diagram in some of my talks that, it used to be education, career, retire. Education was enough to get you on the escalator. Career was ride the escalator up. You collect a pension, die a year later. That was the design of that model. Now we're in the new model, which is learn, leverage, and longevity. So learning is across the lifespan. Leverage is work, changing to leverage to signal work and learning are a combined act. And longevity is, it's not that you're going to have to work your fingers to your bone until you die. It's that we didn't plan for, save for, nor should we have a 30-year retirement. If you're going to live to in your 90s and you retire in your 60s, that's 30 years, which psychologically and cognitively, it's not good for us to be idle. So you'll have different chapters and different ways of engaging, and connecting to your purpose makes that longer arc more enjoyable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you look at some of the models you've created, it has us working until our 80s at least. And for so many reasons, that's actually healthy and beneficial. And I think it could be difficult for people to visualize that if you're in a lane right now that you're not necessarily passionate about. But if you replace that with something that you're passionate about and is your purpose, it all starts to seem lifelong and nothing that you retire from, because it's a part of who you are and what you identify with.
Yeah, I like my mother's 76. She started a boutique clothing store when she was 64. It was her life dream. She's having trouble right now in the middle of the pandemic, but she has said to me, I want to reevaluate at 80 and then figure out where I'm going next. I mean, she loves the store. I mean, it's her self-expression. We'll find things like that are our self-expression that align with who we think we are and what we want to, how we want to connect to our communities.
Absolutely. And some of my friends that do follow studies in the future of work, they have planned something different for each decade. So something that they want to study and specialize in their 40s, 50s, 60s, not just this where we see life absolutely changing and cutting off at 65. Because that model also was, I think, post-war is why that was designed that way. And we built benefits and things like that, all part of this post-war program, and it doesn't necessarily fit in today's world at all.
Yep.
And then in terms, some of the tools, as we see right now in a more distributed workforce, and questions that I get about this distributed workforce are things like trust, being a core part of employee culture and management culture. Going back to work in some ways, if you're in the office, we might be able to expect some type of health apps, health monitoring, but productivity apps is a question that I get a lot in this new digital age of people working remotely. What is your opinion on monitoring people's productivity And does that clash with organizations trying to build a strong, resilient culture, which I think a backbone of that is trust?
Yeah, I think if you're monitoring people, you hired the wrong people. That's
Mm-hmm.
just my personal opinion. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if you have to do that, you really hired the wrong people, because trust is the accelerant. As Dov Seidman says in my book, it's the only legally performance and human performance enhancing drug.
Mm-hmm.
So if you establish it, you're going to get more out of your people. And I've talked to people over the last 60 or so days about how things are going. And obviously people are adapting, sick of Zoom and they're tired and all that other stuff. But most of them are saying, I didn't realize how much my people would do if I just trusted them, some
Mm-hmm.
form or fashion. So, and the other thing is, I think we measure sometimes what's easy to measure, or we measure where we have a tool. And I don't even know that productivity is the right thing to measure, because I don't think we know what most people do in work. We
Mm-hmm.
kind of measure this stuff over here because we can, even though it might be the least significant thing somebody does.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think we need like measuring based on output. And this
Yeah.
is going to force us to do that. We used to use a marker of, the person who got into the office first and left last
Yeah.
was probably the hardest worker. Not at all. I think we need to measure just based on project output. And now it will force us to use proper benchmarks.
Right, because a lot of times in an organization, it's the person who's thinking clearly, who has the insight that changes your business. And
Mhm,
you don't think clearly and have that insight if you're in the office like 14, 18 hours a day trying to kill yourself because you're
mhm,
exhausted and you're making bad decisions. It might be the person who goes for a walk at lunch every single day who has the most meaningful impact on your organization.
mhm. Absolutely. And so for anybody that's listening right now, that's an employee, or a manager and business leader, what advice would you have, for people to prepare and to kind of future-proof their career, or to at least future-proof their mindset if you're an employee, and if you're a leader?
I get that question a lot, and one of the things I like to dispel is there's no skill in the world we can download in you that will make you future-proof,
Mhm,
other than to ignite the passion you already have inside you, because that's what the fuel that's going to keep you learning and adapting and changing. So I think all education systems, all preparation, and all parenting should be focused on what's inherently inside this person, what's driving them, how do I steer them towards their interests, how do I encourage them when they hit roadblocks to continue to develop their their superpowers. There's the, I kind of call it the why and the how, because you're going to have lots of whats. You're going to have lots of jobs. Don't focus on a what, focus on your why and kind of uncovering it. So think about yourself. One of the people I interview in the book is Katie O'Keefe from Cisco's Chill Lab, who says, think about yourself like a prototype in beta. Put yourself in as many experiences as you can and pay attention to the feedback you're getting from those experiences, because that's going to help you understand what lights your fire, what motivates you.
mhm. Absolutely. I think that's some very valuable advice. And I want to leave some time for questions. So if you have any from today, please send them through, and I'll start reading a few.
Okay.
We actually have quite a few on the side here. Any tips on how to challenge an employer to work remotely if they have an old school management strategy? Could expect return to 5 days a week back to the office. So any advice on how to?
Yeah, I mean, I'm of two minds of it. One, I would think that this experience would give them the exposure to realize that I've got a really great person and they want to work at home. And so why don't I enable this person to work in the conditions that they feel are best?
Mhm,
Then you could make the financial argument, which we talked about earlier. And then if you're exhausted by those two, I say this all the time, look for a new boss.
mhm,
Look for a new boss, look for a new employer, because you're never going to win that battle if you're not aligned on the things you value. Your
mhm.
values alignment. So you're not going to change somebody, but you can change your job. I know
Absolutely.
right now it's really hard, but
Mhm.
normally you can change your
Yeah.
job.
Non-pandemic times.
Yeah.
How does it work for one-on-one services like hair salons? Um, and I'm not sure what this kind of refers to, but for this question, give us a little bit more details of what you mean by how it works. But a question on universal basic income. And so that's something that's debated quite often among futurists, economists. Does this work? Does this not? I think we've kind of shown that we need some form of monthly government help if we are to make these big types of changes, but do you think a UBI in some form needs to be 100% a part of the conversation, not just part of certain candidates bringing to light, but it just needs to be a part of the plan?
I don't know if it needs to be long-term for everybody. I think we're seeing in this moment the value of doing it to keep folks stable, because you can't keep folks home if you can't keep them fed. You got to cover your basic needs if you want a society to comply with stopping the spread of a virus like this. UBI was originally discussed around technological unemployment, where we thought, masses of people would lose their jobs, and then we would similarly have to deal with unrest if people don't have their basic needs covered, and it's the right thing to do. I think it's interesting to look at some of the studies. There was one in Canada in the 70s. There was one in Canada more recently, and then they had a change in government, because some of the things they found was that even small UBI was enough of a cushion. It raised the floor enough to change your healthcare costs, because you had better health outcomes. You have better health outcomes when you have access to universal healthcare as well. But the healthcare costs could be offset by the UBI. The healthcare cost savings can be offset by the UBI. So whether it needs to be something that's permanent and long-term, and how many people it covers, I think the term critical basic income is probably a better one, because then you're hitting the parts of the society that need it. My concern with UBI has always been, is if we just pay people without a connection to purpose. I think we need purpose in some way. So helping people find purpose, I think, is really important. It wasn't about the numbers. It was more about, how do you make people feel like they're part of us, as contributing part of society.
I think that's actually a very good way to frame it. If people aren't connected to purpose, then that could lead to a whole other kind of stream of problems. If you're just kind of getting a regular income, you might not be motivated to find something. But if we support you in finding that thing, and know that you're going to be safe in that transition, then that's a different story.
Right.
We have a question here. I think a lot about the balance of how terrible travel is for the environment, but how so many countries depend on tourism. How do we balance these types of things going forward?
I don't know yet. I think it's going to be interesting to see how we come out of it, where we travel, how we travel. I was just reading this morning, like in the short term, that like New Zealand and Australia, I was supposed to be in Australia next month. New Zealand and Australia are thinking about forming a bubble, that you can travel between New Zealand and Australia, but you can't go to the UK and then France and China and everywhere else. I wonder if bubbles will start emerging, and then we start traveling within bubbles. I don't know. And also, there's always been scientific breakthroughs that can make travel better for the environment. And maybe this is the moment where we push for more of them.
Yeah, let's hope. And I think one thing that's happened because of this pandemic and these distributed working networks, you see companies partnering that otherwise would have just been seen as competitors. And when you have that type of collaboration, it can fire innovation that we need. We know that Dyson came out with ventilators, and within about 9 days, because they worked with a lot of different partners in their supply chain. So hopefully things like building a greener planet, now that we're all working together and have united common goals, that's a bigger incentive. And I'll try to see if there's any more here, but I think that might be it so far. And so thank you so much.
Sure.
Such a rock star, and your knowledge base on the future of work is really incredible. How can people get a hold of you or follow you in the future?
So the book is called The Adaptation Advantage. That is Tom Friedman from the New York Times wrote the foreword for it. Chris Shipley and I wrote it together. That is on Amazon and every bookseller, digital, print, etc. HeatherMcGowan.com. You can find me there. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn or follow me on LinkedIn. I post articles multiple times a day, what I'm reading, what I think is important. Chris Shipley and I, if you go to the adaptationadvantage.com, you could sign up. We have virtual book clubs, and we have a bi-monthly newsletter. So that's how you can get in touch with me. But I just wanted to say one thing as we're closing out. I don't think we've given ourselves enough credit for what we've done over the last 60 days. Because I think the amount of adaptation that's taken place, the amount of empathy that's spread around, the amount of caring for our neighbors, the speed in which people have said, okay, I'm home, I'm teaching my kids, I'm helping them online, I'm doing this, I'm running to the grocery store for my neighbor. The amount of adaptation people have done in this period of time just blows me away. Companies remapping supply chains and pivoting products to critical need, applauding our healthcare workers on Friday night, all of it I think is amazing. And all we're kind of looking at is, when are we going to get back to normal and all that other stuff, when we need to take a pause and say, this has really been a very, very good human moment. And I'm proud of all of us for that.
Absolutely. And I think that is an important point to note. And look what we can do together without throwing any practice or any manuals, and no blueprint. And we've tackled some pretty incredible things. So yes, thank you for highlighting that. I think that that's a really important end note for everyone. Well, thank you all so much for tuning in. I promised that we would keep it short and efficient and to the point. I sure learned a lot, and I hope you all did too. Thank you, Heather, for joining us. We really appreciate it. And I'll follow up with an email, and we can all go from there.
Thanks so much.
Okay, take care. Thank you.
Rest of your day, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.